On this episode of the Sports Opinions podcast, we return to some normalcy in the show. I have a guest. It's not just me. I have with me Harrison Brown, CEO of HeadCheck Health. He is also a former national rugby player for Hong Kong. And what HeadCheck Health does is pretty cool. It's basically trying to help teams, organizations around sports know what to do when a concussion happens and put in the proper protocol. It's a concussion-filled episode. It's a lot of education. It's a lot of what HeadCheck does. It's awesome. And I think it's something that if you have a kid in sports, if you're passionate about the injury side, the head injury side, the concussion stuff, which has gone out of the limelight with COVID. But before this, head injuries were the most important thing in sports. And I think we're going to see that come back. And HeadCheck is right on the front line. So I really hope you enjoy the show. It's a great show, an interesting show, and enjoy listening to it, everybody. What's up, sports fans, and welcome to the Sports Opinions podcast. I am your host, as always, Alex Cuesta, and with me today is a guy that has bared with me in terms of getting him on the show for a while. I told him a long time ago that I'd have him on, and then as we heard in the last episode where I was solo talking about getting youth sports back up and going as quick as we can because of the importance of them, it was just a bunch of circumstances with getting the house, having the kid, but he's bared with me, and I'm pumped to have him on. Harrison Brown, CEO of HeadCheck Health. How's it going, Harrison?
Hey, Alex, I'm doing well, and appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, excited to be here, excited to chat about this stuff, and hope the house and the kid are doing well.
Yeah, everything's going well. That's kid number 2, so I've added a lot more onto my plate. If anyone tells you that 2 doubles the load, they're lying. It adds tenfold of the load in terms of parenting. So, thank God for my wife. That's all I have to say. But I think it's really cool to have you on as a guest after, because I kind of did a monologue episode to get myself back into it with the show, because I did take a little bit of a hiatus. And that monologue was about getting youth sports going again. And what we're going to talk about basically with you and what you're doing at HeadCheck, I think has a lot to do with the youth sports realm, because it became a major topic over the last few years when talking about head injuries and concussions. And, first off, you told me to introduce you as the CEO of HeadCheck Health, and that's perfectly fine because that's what you're doing now. But this is a sports show, man. I'd be remiss to not mention that you are a elite level rugby player. You played for the Hong Kong national team, if I'm not correct.
Correct. Yes. It's kind of a weird story. So I guess I moved to Hong Kong when I was a kid, and my family got shipped over there, and it's a British island, I guess, based off of China, and it was British for a number of years. And as a result, the British sports are kind of the things that get picked up there. And so my high school, the number one sport was rugby. And so I played rugby, I played basketball, things that I'm based here in Canada, things like hockey and having ice, for example, is just impossible. The school that I went to, it was an international school, so it was a lot of the American kids, and there was other schools around Asia that were American as well. But the idea of having an American football team was just impossible because there'd be nobody to play. So I played rugby. I was super lucky to get to play for the national program, and it was cool to represent the country and getting to travel around to different countries in Asia and wear that jersey. It was pretty awesome. I think, learned a lot about, I guess, being on a team, but being on an elite team, learning about coaching and, team dynamics and things like that I think I took into the later portions of my life where now I'm, I don't play rugby anymore. I play some recreational sports, but a little bit of coaching here and there. And it was just a really cool experience. And I would encourage anybody, whatever sport it is, if you have the ability to play at the highest level, there's things that you'll learn there that you can't learn anywhere else. And you can't really tell somebody or teach somebody about.
So first off, that's absolutely badass that you got to play at a national level. I think any athlete their main dream, obviously if you play, American football here or certain sports, they don't go to the Olympic or national level. But if you have the ability to play at a national level in whatever sport you're playing, that's just fantastic. And you played one of the sports that I played football growing up. I ran track. A few of the sports that I never got to play that I see and I've fallen in love with, rugby's one of them. Lacrosse, we didn't have it at my high school, which I'm pretty pissed because I probably would have never ran track. And also Aussie rules football just looks so much. I remember, I don't know why I was up at 3 a.m. ESPN was on, and I wake up and I just see a bunch of guys that look like Eric Bana just running around killing each other, playing a sport that kind of looks like rugby, but certainly isn't. And then I just fell in love with it. I learned all the rules. I still have no idea who the teams are, but that's a sport that I friggin' love is Aussie rules football. Did you ever get a chance to mess around with Aussie rules over there?
Never got to play it. I mean, obviously, being over in Asia, where we're exposed to some of those Southern Hemisphere games a bit more than you'd get over here in the U.S. and Canada. So I definitely am aware of it. But same as you. I mean, I was always amazed by how brutal it was. And, I guess one of the things that I was super aware of is, even playing rugby in Hong Kong, it's not like we're playing rugby in New Zealand, right? It's an Asian country. I was probably lucky to be there because I definitely would not have been able to play at a high level in some of the more serious rugby countries. But I don't think that takes away from the experience that it was. And just for reference, I mean, we've got a great league here in the US and Canada called MLR, like the Major League Rugby, that they've only been around for a couple of years, but they're making huge strides, I would say, in trying to become, the next major sport. And trying to compete for market share with the big four here in North America. But, things like, obviously money, you need money to build sports leagues. But I think you're going to see a lot of people, I would say in the next 10 years, shift over to rugby. And I guess I would love to see a point where rugby becomes something that, is on ESPN and, people have fantasy teams and stuff like that. And I think that would take it full circle for me from, playing rugby in Asia to being able to follow rugby in the US would be pretty cool.
That is really cool. And I've said for a little while, just looking at the way baseball is kind of sliding in popularity in the United States, I feel like it's only a matter of time before soccer, because the MLS is making big strides in terms of adding more teams, making more revenue. It's only a matter of time before they come up. The NBA is the NBA. Hockey has their little niche group. They're never going away. But it would be cool if rugby can throw their name, because soccer and rugby are two of the biggest sports in the world. So it's not like there isn't a fan base or something there. It's just it needs to break the American bubble. And for whatever reason, all this stuff starts in the Northwest and like Portland and Washington, like all over there. So it's like, that's where it's going to really break the bubble, because that's where soccer is massive, is the Northwest. So I feel like, because they're basically Little England anyway over there, it rains 24 hours a day. So I feel like that's the place where we'll get it. But I want to jump into your experience as a national level player, an elite level player. And, I wouldn't diminish your experience as a Hong Kong national player, because you still got to play up against others who were also at the highest level. So you were still an elite level player. And what did that, how did that pique your interest in seeing the safety side? Because I can imagine you saw plenty of injuries, probably sustained plenty of injuries yourself, playing a brutal sport like rugby. What got you interested in terms of what you saw on the pitch with being going into HeadCheck and creating this safety-based company?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, like when the whole thing happened for me, I was, I was still in my teen years, right? Like, so I started playing when I was for the national team, like when I was 16, and I think I played up until I was 20. And I guess at that point in my life, I didn't really know what it was supposed to be like, and I didn't really know from a safety perspective what was supposed to be happening. I think you're just happy to be there. I think you feel a bit special because, you get to travel a bit, you get, cool jerseys and tracksuits and get to trade those with other countries when you go to tournaments and stuff like that. That was all really cool. And so I guess, the idea of critiquing or even knowing what my opinion would have been with respect to safety and the injuries that were happening to myself and to my teammates, just wasn't there, right? And that was probably a lack of education. I think nowadays the whole idea of empowering athletes to, take ownership over their training and their nutrition and having their own coaches outside of their teams and that stuff. I mean, when you're 19 years old, you probably don't think about it too much, right? And so I didn't really think anything about safety really until I got to university, and I started looking into concussion as an injury. Just a little bit of background: I did a master's and started my PhD studies in the concussion research world, and it's one of those areas where I felt really excited to be part of researching concussions, because it wasn't like cancer where, you need to basically work in the industry for 20 years to publish anything and to make a significant contribution. When I was doing that stuff, it was right on kind of the beginning of when people started learning about concussions and researching them. And so even as a young grad student, I was able to be part of that. And that was really cool. And so I guess that was really when I started to reflect back on, my experience as an athlete and, looking at what was happening out there at all different sports, all different levels, saying, hey, are these people doing what they're supposed to be doing? And how can they possibly be doing better? And that was really where, for me, things started to change. Depending on how deep you want to go into concussion research, you can scare everybody. And it's pretty scary, to be honest. Like, I could certainly tell you some things that are going to make you not want to put you...
Rattle off a few, okay. Let's give the listeners something to think about. Because I think we've all seen the movie Concussion. Okay. And, I think that rattled a few feathers, and that definitely sprung a little more with questioning, contact youth sports and what's going on in the NFL. And I think hockey is going to be the next one to get scrutiny, and boxing, and we're going to see it come down to every level. But give us a few things now. I'm interested that, might scare the hell out of somebody right now.
Okay. So, I'll give you maybe two examples. So
go ahead.
A lot of the research that's been done on understanding at a cellular level what happens when a concussion has to be done in rats or mice. And that's because, we can't open up a human skull after they hit their head and, start measuring things. We've got to wait until after they die, potentially, to be able to look at their brains. So a lot of stuff is done in rats and mice. And there's one experiment out there where they basically take a mouse, they give it a concussion, and they insert things into the mouse, and they're able to basically measure what's happening at the cellular level in the brain. And so you can cuss the animal, and what you're able to see is the brain goes into a state where it's trying to repair itself. And so that makes sense, right? You get a concussion. People recover from concussions. It takes a couple weeks. If you let that process complete itself, it will go back to normal function. So the different chemicals that are flying around the brain, they'll eventually go back to a normal level. And what you'll get is, from a metabolic state, a totally normal functioning brain in this animal. Mm-hmm. And that's great. So that gives us, a little bit of proxy to a human. Obviously it's not a human, but okay. So if a human gets a concussion, if we let them recover, then they're going to be fine. So if you take that same animal, and while it's in that recovery phase, you give it another concussion, which would be similar to, let's say, a player that was concussed and then didn't get removed or returned too soon and got a second concussion. What they've been able to measure is that the metabolic state is no longer going to be in cellular repair. It will actually go to cell death. And so what that tells us is that if the injury doesn't repair itself properly, if it's not allowed to complete that process, it won't go back to normal brain functioning levels. It will actually start killing and dying at the cellular level. Wow. So, I mean, if you need some scientific evidence that if you have a concussion, make sure that you're recovered before you expose yourself to getting another one. Like, there are arguments that could be made that, even at a cellular level, your brain is literally dying. And so, I found that to be pretty scary. There's another one, again, in animals, because we can't do it in humans, where they took I think it was rats again, and they gave them concussions. And I think they gave them a number of impacts to the head, similar to what you'd see in, for example, let's say an NFL lineman, where you're not getting one big hit, you're getting hit after hit after hit after hits. Every single play, you're smashing your head against the defensive lineman. And what they found was, from those repetitive impacts, the glands in the brain that actually release certain hormones will be affected, and they will release those hormones differently. So if you take an infant animal, an infant rat, and you do the same thing to it, it will actually not release the compounds in the same way as a normal, healthy infant rat would. And so what they found was, because the chemicals and the hormones were coming out differently, the rats that had the concussions when they were in their adolescent phase, didn't grow up to be as big. So, human growth hormone potentially was not as significant in the growth of the animal. And also their ability to navigate mazes, which is a proxy in rat research for how intelligent they are. And so basically what that tells us is, obviously it's a far stretch to relate that to a human, but let's say we were able to do that in a human. What that might tell us is that if you're a kid and your kid's playing sports and they're constantly getting concussions and head impacts, it literally might affect what their development looks like. Not only from a physical standpoint, it might affect the hormones, but also from a cognitive standpoint. So I don't, if you're a person that, believes the research and you can extrapolate that from an animal model into a human, it's pretty good evidence that this is something we have to take seriously.
Yeah, that's some pretty scary stuff on its face there. So you obviously have a passion for now studying head injuries and trying to figure out the best way, because sports like football, certain sports that are physical in nature, basketball, even soccer, people don't realize how physical soccer actually is as a sport and how many head traumas occur when they're hitting headers, when they're constantly running into each other, because they are doing certain things there. So you are the CEO of HeadCheck. Mm-hmm. Tell us what HeadCheck does. What is the mission of HeadCheck? Who are you currently working with? Give me the whole nitty gritty on it.
Sure. So I guess the goal for our company is we want to prevent mismanaged head injuries, and that's a reflection of. You'll notice I didn't say prevent the injuries from happening. We want to prevent mismanaged head injuries. So head injuries are going to happen if we have sports. We can't protect ourselves against them. And we want to make sure that when they happen, the appropriate things that are supposed to take place do take place. So I guess my take on what's happened and how HeadCheck has developed is, if you think back to that concussion movie you mentioned, which was 2005 or 2015, I believe, actually. So that's 5 years ago now that came out. And so there had been a whole bunch of media leading up to that point saying, this is a serious injury. People should care about it. There's lawsuits in the NFL. And then eventually we got a Hollywood movie with Will Smith. So all of that attention has basically freaked everybody out. And as a result, every single state in the United States now has a law that is basically saying, if you're a sports organization with a risk of concussion, you have to have a protocol. So everybody's got protocols, and we've implemented these protocols. If you play in any sort of organized sport, there's probably a protocol either with your school, your team, your league, your governing body, whatever it is. There's a protocol that exists. And the reality of it is most organizations don't follow those protocols. And so what that means is we've got a protocol out there that says, this is a serious injury. We're going to do A, B, and C to make sure that the effects of it are limited. And what's happening is people aren't doing A, B, and C. And so when you see these lawsuits come out, it's basically, hey, you said we're going to do something, you didn't do it. Now you're liable because this person's life is ruined. And so at HeadCheck, really what we're trying to do here is we're going to try to make it really, really easy for any organization at any level, any sport, to actually do A, B, and C easier. So what that means is if there's testing that's required, if there's certain documentation, if there's education that's necessary, everything that you could possibly need to follow that policy document and implement what's considered best practice concussion policy, you can do it within HeadCheck. and we can customize it for any league, any level of play, any language. It doesn't matter. And so what we've done is we've created a very easy way for organizations to execute on what they said they're going to be doing. Now, the second part to it is the whole idea of what's happening right now, which is there is policies out there and nobody follows them. And part of that is that there's no way to check. So, if your kid's playing in a minor sports game and they receive a head impact and there's potentially a concussion, there's nobody that checks to make sure that what was supposed to happen does happen. And so that's the second part to what we do at HeadCheck is we sell that product to, large governing bodies, leagues, examples like Major League Soccer, Canadian Football League, NCAA universities, where not only are we giving them the tool to actually do A, B, and C, but we're also giving them the tool to be able to lift up the hood and check, hey, there's 30 teams in my league. How many of those 30 are actually compliant to the policy? And the ones that aren't, why is it they're not compliant? And so what happens there is we're really giving visibility into, are we as a sports industry compliant to these policies that are supposed to keep our players safe? And obviously as you can imagine, because people aren't aware of these policies or they don't follow them or they don't try and nobody checks currently, the compliance level across all of sports is a joke. Like it's if we go into a league and 50% of the teams are compliant, they're doing a good job, because most leagues are not even half their teams are doing it properly. And this is not doing it properly from our perspective. This is, you literally have a piece of paper that says, I'm going to do A, B, and C, and you're not doing A, B, and C. It's very, very easy problem to solve. So that's really what we're here for. We think if we can accomplish that, give them the tool to make it easy, and then give them a tool to check to make sure it's being done. And when it's not being done, highlight where so that we can fix it. We think we're going to be able to prevent mismanaged head injuries.
So in the most, dumbed down way, because I work in construction, I'm a union construction worker, and basically we have, and any place that I've ever worked has kind of standard operating procedures for certain things. So in a way, you are providing a universal standard operating procedure for sports, because sports in general is a company, and I feel like some sports have more severe head injuries than others, but like you said, if somebody takes a blow to the head, there should be a universal standard operating procedure for how to now go ahead and discern, okay, just got a blow to the head, not a concussion. Are they clear to go back in? Should we hold them out anyway? So I think that it's a good thing to do, because I feel like that has been a big issue, even for me growing up with sports, is, I think you might be a little younger than me, but it was kind of the whole entire, he got his bell rung. Get him back out. He got his bell rung. Can you see 2 fingers? All right, get back out there. Go play. And that was just kind of the way it was, and that has all changed. So am I simplifying it too much by saying that you're essentially providing a standard operating procedure for everybody?
No, I would just tweak it a little bit. I mean, the standard operating procedures already exist. Like, for years, every single state has had laws saying that you have to have those operating procedures. The difference is that we're providing a way to actually execute them and monitor that they're actually followed. Because right now we do have these standard operating procedures out there. It's just nobody follows them. And that's why there's lawsuits. That's why people's lives are getting ruined. We're just going to make it easy for people to actually follow them, because you already said you're doing it. So if you don't do it, you're going to get in trouble, and people's lives are going to get ruined. So let's make it easier for you. And I would say that's the only tweak I'd put to it.
So do you guys do any education on the prevention side and what can be done in terms of certain contact sports and prevention? Because you being a former rugby player, me being a former football player, I feel like there is some similarities in the way we're taught how to tackle, we're taught how to hit, we're taught how to take an impact. And one of the things that I see in terms of the rise in concussions is the rise in the freak athlete, where there are more freak athletes now than I think ever has been, because we work out a lot sooner. We start specializing a lot sooner. We start to notice how athletic somebody is, and let's get them involved. Let's do all this. And I saw, in my time growing up, there were a lot more coaches who were very stressed on the technique. Like, no, don't put your crown of your helmet into anywhere. You're going to break your neck. If I see you do that, you're out. And I think as the freak athletes came, and there's this kid where you definitely college-bound kid, you'll give him leeway because he's going to make a play, whether he's making it correct or not. I think a lot of coaches are scared to coach talent right now because they want to see that talent perform. They don't want to piss that kid off. They don't want that kid's parents to take him out of the sport. And I think there's a lot more of that going on. I think then it trickles up and it trickles up. And as the kid gets better, they're allowed to just play with bad technique because they're that good. And then it leads to head injuries. Did you see any of that in rugby where technique was stressed? Because I feel like, especially in rugby where you guys aren't wearing pads, the technique needs to be flawless for a lot of you guys. And was there a lot of coaching done when the technique wasn't proper?
Yeah, I mean, rugby's, I think, interestingly now, there are rugby players and rugby groups that are going to high schools around the nation coaching tackling technique.
That's awesome.
That's becoming a thing now, is rugby tackling techniques for football players. And I guess the background behind that is it's not that rugby players are better at tackling. It's just simply the nature of the game. So in rugby, it's continuous play. There's not supposed to be, if somebody gets tackled, you blow the whistle, you get, 45 seconds to get, and drop a play, coach dials it in. It's as soon as that tackle is made, the game continues. So if you're going into a tackle and you're flying, leading with your head, and you knock yourself out, you're hurting your team because your team now has one less player that's able to play on the field.
Yep.
So in rugby, the whole point of tackling is really to prevent their forward motion and, potentially turn the ball over. But as soon as you make that tackle, you got to get up right away and you might have to make another tackle, or the ball might be turned over and you might be on offense now. So the whole point of tackling in rugby is very different than football. You're not trying to hurt someone. You're not trying to, knock them out. You're really just trying to stop them and get them to the ground so that you can potentially turn that ball over and go back the other direction. So I think that is part of the reason why you're seeing this emergence of new tackling techniques. I think also, there's, apart from rugby, I think there's a logical aspect to that, which is, if I can fly across the middle and lead with my crown and smoke you in the ribs and knock the wind out of you, and then you're out for 2 plays, is that cool? Maybe. Is that exciting for the fans? Maybe. But if that means that I'm potentially going to injure myself and I can't play in the game anymore, and that affects, whether our team wins, if I'm a really good player, it's just not a good decision. And so I think that's the other reason behind this, which is athlete health and safety is directly related to performance. So if I'm putting myself in a position where I'm going to decrease my health and decrease my safety, it's going to decrease the performance of myself and my team. So I'm not an expert on the topic, but I would say there's very few good reasons to put yourself in a position where you might hurt yourself. And I just think it's a logical outcome, right? Like, yeah, I can do a big hit I see you coming across the middle. I can do a big hit, maybe get a roar from the crowd. But is that more important, or is winning the game more important? And maybe some people get selfish. Maybe some people, they were never taught how to actually tackle, and that's why we're getting these new techniques coming in. But for me, if I was a coach and I saw a player do that type of play, I mean, I would just be so furious.
Oh, I coach for a little, and I wouldn't allow it. I just, if kids were doing that, I'd take them out, explain to them why, and then, when they're ready to go back in, when I thought they were ready, because they'd obviously be pissed and huffing and puffing, I didn't care if they were the best player or not. They came out. Yeah. But in your research in concussions, because I was curious about this, because I, before Sports Opinions Podcast was a podcast, it was a blog, and I wrote an article. It wasn't empirically based. It wasn't super research based. It was based off basically my experience, because concussions were a hot topic a few years ago, like we said, and rightfully so, it's a hot topic. It's very dangerous. And I wrote an article essentially saying that with proper technique in football, it was basically based off football mostly, but in any sport, if you're using the properly taught technique, concussions will occur, but it won't be at the significant level that we see it at. Does the research back that up, or is there something that needs to change in the technique? If everyone in football is not leading with their crown, if their head's up, if they're blocking properly, going for the pads, hands to faces, obviously those things happen, but there's less, intentionality in doing it. Would we see a major decrease in concussions if people were just taught properly how to play and did it?
I mean, that's an awesome question. I think, the answer is I'm not sure. I'd love to give you a better answer, but I guess to give you perspective on that, I mean, there are certain ways that leagues currently, and I presume governing bodies as well, are trying to prevent or limit concussions as little as possible in the sport. So that's one of the values behind what we do at HeadCheck, is actually tracking what's happening and how things are happening so that we can inform policy and rule changes. So, for example, in football, you might have noticed that, you know, recently there's been some universities, the pros, some high schools even, that are moving where you kick the ball off from. Mm-hmm. And the idea is if you have more touchbacks, like if you move the ball up and the kickers can actually get it out of the end zone, then there is potentially going to be less plays where you have somebody running 50 yards at full speed and somebody running the other direction 50 yards at full speed and then meeting in the middle with their heads banging against each other.
So before you continue, did you watch the XFL and what they did? I thought that what they did was amazing, and we didn't see a single injury on the kickoff, I don't think.
Yep.
I just thought that with the way that they did it, it was very limiting because it was more of a normal style blocking, and it wasn't guys at full speed getting to a kicker who's now trying to get his full returner, trying to get his full speed as quick as possible. I feel like it was a much more relaxed kickoff environment and much safer. Do you agree?
Totally. Absolutely. I mean, yeah. So their leagues have these little tools and these little levers that they can pull to try and make player safety better. And so this is one of those examples where it's like, hey, we understand that when people are running at full speed across the field and then meeting in the middle head to head, obviously it's going to lead to some potential brain injury. So if we can change the rule and it doesn't affect the outcome of the game potentially, let's do as many of those things as we possibly can. And so when you're asking questions about, you know, tackling techniques and coaching and stuff like that, at the root of this issue of concussions is head contact. And if you can limit head contact in whatever it is that you're doing, you know, there's not research out there that proves this, but, you know, theoretically it should reduce concussions. And, you know, one of the things that we're still not sure of from, you know, across the industry is, how do you create a concussion? Like, what are the circumstances where a concussion occurs? We used to believe if you were knocked out, you were concussed. If you were not knocked out, you were fine. And that's been disproved. Mm-hmm. Now, and I guess the next step now is, if you take a big hit versus a small hit, did the concussions only happen on the big hits? And that's not true anymore. We now know that there are some people that can take, you know, 100 G hit to the head and be totally fine. There's no injury. And other people where they take a 10 G hit, which is equivalent to like heading a soccer ball, and they might never be able to walk again. And so from that standpoint, I still don't think we're at the point yet where we can say, hey, if you're, you know, hitting with less force, or your head's in a certain direction, or, you know, the helmet's better or whatever, then you can actually prevent the injury. But, you know, until we get to that point where we actually understand the injury enough to be able to say that, by nature, I just, you know, less head contact is better, and probably less, you know, aggressive head contact is better. So that whole thing of, you know, kickoffs, I think just makes so much sense. And as you mentioned, the XFL stuff, I thought it was just as exciting as a normal kickoff.
Yeah. So two things. One, I don't believe that better technology will create a safer environment. I think if you give elite athletes better technology and tell them that they don't have to make their technique better, then they're just going to go even harder with their worst technique, and it's not going to help anything. That's my one belief, especially in football. Better helmets, I don't think will lead to more safety. I just think they'll cut more corners and take more chances. And number two, if you are in any sort of way trying to influence youth in terms of collegiate and high school and sports underneath, I had a radical idea that I don't think the schools will enjoy or the coaches will enjoy. But I've always had the idea when this all became a big thing that we should give the power to the officials. And this is really talking to football mostly, but it can branch to other sports. Give the power to the officials. If they see a player using improper technique intentionally, you could see if a player, you know, if the level change happens and it's an unintentional crown hit, that happens. But if a player is using the technique, going into a crown to make a tackle, or a running back is using their crown as a weapon, which isn't brought up enough with running backs using their crowns of the head as a weapon. But if they're doing that, the official can then give the player a warning. They do it again, the kid's out of the game. If another player does it again and it looks intentional, now the coach is gone. And it could lead to suspensions. I feel like if you start to put the onus on the coaches, the schools, and the athletes, we'll start to see better technique all around. And we'll start to see people caring more about preventing this. Because right now, losing a player sucks. You never want to lose your star player. But there's no repercussions for allowing the kid to do this thing or saying, well, I tried to teach him and he just wouldn't do it. No, now you're out of the game. Now you're suspended. Now the coach is suspended. And I think if you do that trickle up, now the AD might be gone in a major college. Like certain things like that you can penalize would then create the change, because no coach is now going to want to be suspended from that big rivalry game next week. Your star defensive back or star running back, wide receiver, they're not going to want to be kicked out of a game that may be tight. I feel like these types of things will start to get the change while creating better technique and creating more safety.
Yeah, so. I agree completely. I mean, there was one last week in the Seahawks game where I forget who it was, but I think it was a safety got thrown out for hitting a defenseless receiver. And that's exactly what needs to be happening, right? Happening at the NFL level. So people are seeing it on TV, millions of eyeballs are watching. Yeah, that guy made a huge hit. It was so cool. Oh, he's out of the game. And that literally might affect the outcome of this game. They might lose because he's one of their better players. Yeah. And people need to see that happening, right? And so I completely agree. I
feel like it needs to go to the coaches. I feel like head coaches need to start getting kicked down. I feel like we need to start talking about running backs more, because I see it constantly where running backs, quote unquote, put their head down. And even the commentators say he put his head down. And what? No, if I can't as a defender put my head into you with the crown to tackle you, you sure as hell shouldn't be able to put your head down to get a few extra yards. That should be penalized every single time, and it's not.
I mean, I would assume that that's a rule.
It is, and they just never follow it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think these things, obviously, if they haven't trickled down to high school and youth and Pop Warner and that stuff, I think they should. I mean, if you've got that kid that just matured quicker than everybody else, and he's an absolute beast, and he's a running back, and he's just leading with his crown, running over 6 guys at once. Yeah, it's cool to watch on YouTube, but at the end of the day, we shouldn't be promoting that. And yep. It's up to you're right, it's up to the official. And I mean, in an ideal world, you'd have coaches that, would do it themselves and take their own players out. But as we know, that's not the case in many sports and many levels. It's, some people are there to win, and however that they will do that, they will.
Yeah. So we went off on a tangent, but a fun tangent there. But I want to get back to kind of head check and what you guys are trying to do. So if you can go over what proper protocols that you're kind of preaching after the injury occurs, and what type of management you're saying needs to be in place in order to get this athlete back on the field safely, back on the field of play, court of play, whatever they go on safely. And when teams are skirting by this, obviously the risk is the athlete's health, but what other risks are occurring when teams aren't compliant with this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say from a high level standpoint, there are some commonalities between concussion policies across all sports, across all levels. Our job at HeadCheck is not to define those policies. Mm-hmm. There's much smarter people out there that are making those decisions. Our job is to make technology that makes it easy to follow when the experts say you got to do something. And, key components of any concussion protocol, I think the first one is education. And, it's the old thing about if you don't educate somebody on why they should take it seriously or what the risks are, you're not going to get buy-in. And, so the first step is always to educate players, families, coaches, officials. Everybody needs to be aware of concussions and what are the signs and symptoms and really what the protocol is, right? I think most people nowadays that are involved in sports, if you were to ask them, what is your concussion protocol, they would not be able to tell you what that was. And that's
the athletic trainer's job to know, not theirs. That's really what it's the AT's job. If they grab me and bring me under the tent, then I know I'm in protocol.
Yeah, but I guess if the AT is not doing what they should be doing, how do you hold them accountable?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like that's one of the good things that has come out of this being under the microscope. If a football player on TV or a hockey player, you see them take one wobbly step and the coach and the trainer doesn't pull them right out, it's the third degree. Whether he's fine or not, whether he just, tripped on his own, it doesn't matter, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
Go ahead, continue.
So going down that. So the first one would be education. Some of the things that we're doing a head check to try and contribute to this is, the way that education has been provided, pretty much up until now is here's a handout, or in more advanced organizations, here's a video. And what they do is they basically track, hey, did you watch that video, or, did you receive that handout? And that's not very effective. It's been proven through research, actually, that those forms of education just don't work. People don't retain the information. People, are checking their phone when they're watching the video. It just doesn't work. So one of the things that HeadCheck's been doing is we've been trying to find partners in all the areas of a concussion protocol to be leaders. And one of those areas is interactive concussion education. And so a partnership that we actually announced last week was with a group called TeachAids. And they have a module called Crash Course, which is done in conjunction with, all these governing bodies of sports across the U.S. So, USA Hockey, USA Football, US Lacrosse, pretty much, most of the contact sports. And what it is almost, I'm not sure if you remember these when you were younger, it's almost like a Goosebumps choose your outcome type program where you're put into the body of a high school football player. It's first person view. It works on VR or just a normal computer, and you're playing a game. And, when you receive a tackle, you might get some blurriness and the screen will go blurry, and you're given a choice. And it's like, choice A is I stay down. Choice B is I get up and I go back to the huddle. And it's basically a whole, program like that where you're weaving in and out of different storylines, and, in certain points it's pausing, and pro athletes, like NFL guys, are coming on saying, hey, I experienced this a couple times and this is what I did. And so the idea there is you're actually engaging the individual to almost be put in the body of, hey, when this happens, when I'm playing football, what am I going to do? What should I do? What should I know? And the idea there is that it's a much better way to help retain information, and we're super excited to have partners like that. So education is by far, I'd say, one of the most important pillars. The second thing would be just making sure that the appropriate decision-making hierarchy is in place. So you mentioned earlier athletic trainers. They are limited in their scope of what they're allowed to do. And, it's such an important industry. It's such an important person to have at every single athletic event, but they're not allowed to do things that doctors can do sometimes. And there's certain points where you don't want an athletic trainer to be doing something because they don't have the education and they don't have the right really to make certain diagnoses. So it's really defining, hey, if my high school doesn't have an athletic trainer and we only have a coach out there, what can that coach do? What's within scope for that coach? If we have an athletic trainer, what can that athletic trainer do? What can't they do? And all the way up to the pros where you've got, neurologists on the sideline. Obviously, they're going to have a much bigger bag of tools that they can choose from and decisions that they can make than you would have a high school football coach, where you don't want to put them in a position where they're trying to act like a neurologist. And so that's kind of the second piece to it would be making sure that you've got those clearly defined and they match your organization. If you took the NFL concussion policy and you gave it to a high school, it wouldn't work. They don't have the same resources. They don't have the same people. They don't have the same access to tools. And then the last aspect I would say is having some sort of way to monitor what's happening. And to give you an example of why monitoring is important, the one thing across all concussion policies you'll see is in order to go back to play, to receive clearance, you have to have a physician provide that. So you can't have an AT clear you. You can't have a physio clear you. You can't have a naturopath clear you. You can't have a chiro clear you. And in some states, you've got different rules about who can do it and who can't. But the general consensus is it's got to be a physician. And, you know, the vast majority of sports organizations in the United States do not have a physician on site. And so you're relying on somebody to come to you with a physician's note saying, you know, I can go back to play. And sometimes what happens is you get a coach that's put in a tough position because they're receiving a note from, you know, we've seen ones at HeadCheck where it's a clearance note from a parent saying, hey, I know my kid, you know, I checked him out, he's good, put him back in. You know, we've seen things from even dentists, you know, they're doctors, you know, dentist clearance notes saying, yep, nope, I'm a dentist and player seems good, put him back in. And then what's happening is the coach is having to make a tough decision from an ethics standpoint as to, do I accept this note and put the player in or do I not? And sometimes there's emotion involved in that. You know, the kid really wants to play. The parents might be upset if you hold them out. And so this stuff is literally happening as we speak across the industry. And so having a way to monitor, you know, is that rule of a physician note clearance actually happening? And how many times out of 10 is it actually not happening? And what we're going to find by doing these type of things is that there's huge gaps in the industry that we just need to highlight. And then once we've highlighted them, we can start fixing them. So I would say those are the overall policies, overall sports. Those are the three things I really focus on.
So those pillars, you know, those sound like good ones to jump off on, and they're definitely universal ones that every sport can use. So I think it's a good place to start. And it sounds like if those things were implemented, we'd see a lot more concussions going down. So that's, you know, a really good place to start. Now, I want to jump into a topic that I don't know if you've been asked about, but you've definitely, being the company it seems like you guys are, you've probably been focusing on this. The effects that the pandemic, the effects that COVID-19 have had on certain sports and basically all the sports with concussions, where we have had a big lack of preseasons, a big lack of preparation. And with the preparation comes sort of the proper education time, because when you're going through the first walkthroughs, it's kind of just technique work again. And it's going through things at half speed before we can get to full speed, especially in the contact sports. You need to be cleared to do certain things. Have you seen an uptick in concussions sports wide because it's kind of just a rush to get back to playing?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say at this point, sports haven't returned back enough yet to where we can even answer that question with a valid data set. Mm-hmm. You know, we're still at a point where most sports right now across the U.S. are still in limbo. Yeah. You know, or they're modified, right? So in hockey, in some states, you're getting 3-on-3, no contact. You're getting in soccer, you're getting, you know, no headers, no throw-ins, so that you're not touching the ball. And so it's not really comparable, I guess, is what I would say at this point. But, you know, from a theoretic standpoint, it's the same thing as cramming for a test, right? Like if you've got all these things that you need to do to be prepared and you're cramming that into a week as opposed to a month, you know, you're obviously not going to be as prepared as you should be. And so, yeah, I would think that, you know, lack of technique. I mean, the other thing to keep in mind, though, is that in one thing that they teach a lot in hockey, for example, is how do you receive a hit?
Yep.
Right. Like, you know, part of it is giving a hit, but how do you receive a hit? You know, when you see somebody coming behind you, you know, how do you prepare your body to receive that impact? And again, these are things that, you know, you can be taught. These are things that, you know, you can be in walkthroughs, you can speak about them and give examples, but unless you're actually giving live practice, you're probably not going to be as prepared as you should be. And so, yeah, I would expect that, you know, we won't have numbers from NCAA or NFL for a while, or if we even get those numbers, but, yeah, I would think just from a theoretic standpoint, people are not going to be prepared for contact as well as they should be. And, you know, as a result, I think knowing that what we should be seeing and what should be happening is we should be a bit more cautious. And sometimes people don't like that. And, you might have to pull an extra person out that you normally wouldn't, but I don't know how else you manage it.
So, for lack of a better term, because I don't want to say anyone's taking advantage of this situation with COVID-19 and the pandemic, but this is in a positive way. Have you guys kind of jumped on this opportunity where there has been no sports, things have been different, and there's been very dormant to reach out to all the organizations that you guys work with and say, hey, let's ramp up the education portion now while there is no contact, while there is no sport. Let's get our coaches back in here and let's really go over this type of stuff and figure out and get through the protocols and go through the management again, so that not only is the onus on the doctors and the ATs, but the coaches all know their role. Now the players know their roles as well. Have you guys been trying to push that envelope a little bit with the lack of actual competition going on, or has it just been kind of, I know the schools probably have some rules about it, or have you guys been stuck in a little bit of a dormant state too of just really researching hard on the former numbers? Like, where is HeadCheck now during all this limbo?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've been significantly impacted because our clients are sports teams, and when they're struggling and they can't play, and they can't bring fans in to pay their bills, and when they can't accept registration fees from families that they use that money to pay us, obviously we're going to be affected, right? And the biggest thing I'd say that we're doing right now is we're trying to have as many conversations with not only our clients but with people in the industry. Just leading with empathy and making sure that they're doing all right, and if we can help them with anything, and B, to try and find solutions. So for example, some of our leagues, they've decided that they're just not going to play this year. And so, rather than send them a bill for, a contract they signed, we're pushing those contracts out an extra year. And we're saying, hey, this year's on us, don't worry about it. We know that even if we sent you this invoice, you probably wouldn't be able to pay for it. And the last thing you should be worrying about now is paying for your technology fees. So that's generally the approach that we're having with the markets. In terms of trying to push the limits on education and that kind of stuff, a little bit. I mean, one of the things that we've focused on internally, not externally, is our product over the last couple of months. And, there is so many things that we want to do and things that we're limited to do because we don't like doing development in season for some of our sports. We don't want to have a player that's injured on the field and you go and you open up your phone and you've got to update the app, or, it looks completely different than the last time you logged in. So sometimes we hold back on some updates. And so we've really focused on, all those features that people told us they wanted last year. We're actually getting through a huge chunk of them that we wouldn't have gotten to at this point in time. So we're going to see a huge upgrade in our product for future seasons because of this COVID shutdown, whatever you want to call it, which I think is great for anybody that's working with us. But from an external standpoint of, are we trying to push education? We're trying to create a community, and that's education is part of that. We've put a huge amount of effort and time and money into building a community over the last couple months. And that's not going on social media, posting about our product saying, hey, buy HeadCheck. It's really good at this. Here's a feature you might like. It's supporting people that are doing other cool stuff in the concussion space. It's highlighting other companies that are doing cool things. It's having athletes come on and say a couple words that maybe would speak to somebody that follows us that might be looking up to that athlete. And so that's one thing that I think I've been pretty excited about is that's another thing, building a community that needs to happen to address this issue properly. And we probably honestly wouldn't have had time to do this if it was a normal year.
So this is kind of more of an opinion piece with this question. When we fully come out of this pandemic, we're definitely seeing right now there's more safety going on, but it's safety in terms of germs and spreading our types of, things to other mucous membranes in order to prevent this virus. Do you see us coming out with more of an emphasis on player safety in general when we come out of the other side of this? Is there going to be more of an emphasis on, the virus is over, but we saw all these other injuries that were still the same football injuries, and now we haven't been focusing on these as much. Let's get back to it. Let's double our effort type of deal. Or is it going to be unfortunate, the old, same old, same old?
Great question. I would say right now, if you talk to administrators or commissioners or presidents of sports leagues and teams, pretty much the only thing they care about is COVID, which is valid because that's the one thing that's preventing them from functioning. But what that's doing, and because of some of these measures that have been put into place, digital health and using digital technology to accomplish safety is being forced. And there's it's weird to think of, but there's literally organizations that we've dealt with in the past where we've sold them a tool to basically manage their concussion testing from their phone. They can do everything they possibly need, but the person doesn't know how to log into their phone, or the person forgets their password, and all these simple things. And that's just because we're not used to going to digital places to achieve player safety. And so that was something that, industry leaders like, ATs at NCAA universities and pros and all that stuff, they were like that, but the vast majority of the population wasn't. And so now what's happening is everybody, has to comply with some of these COVID regulations, filling out symptom questionnaires to get to work. The whole concept of using your phone or using your computer to achieve safety is going to become common. And that's just the way it's going to be done. And we're never going to go back to paper. We're never going to go back to filing cabinets. We're never going to go back to faxes. And that's something that benefits not only us in HeadCheck for concussions, but for any injury. There's going to be a huge push towards digital because it just makes more sense. It's easier, it's cheaper, it's more effective, it's more scalable, it's more accessible to people. And I'm just excited to see, 10 years from now, the whole concept of, keeping notes in a binder and carrying around prescriptions and which allergy your kid has in a binder on the sports team is just not going to exist anymore. And I think that's a positive change.
Yeah, definitely. So Harrison, really want to thank you for coming on the show. I had lots of fun.
Me too. Appreciate it, Alex. Anytime.
So again, he's Harrison Brown, CEO of HeadCheck Health. And I think a company that, not because of this little show, but in general, what they're doing, you're going to start to see a lot more of, especially when we come out of this pandemic on the bigger stage. I think it's only a matter of time before you're partnering with some of the big dogs in American sports. And I'm really excited because I think you're passionate about what you do. And I think your mission and having a leader like you who's passionate about it is going to lead this company really far.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Alex. And we've got some big announcements up our sleeve, and just stay tuned.
So where can people find HeadCheck? Is there a Twitter? Is there an Instagram website? Where can people learn more about what you do?
Yeah, so the website is just headcheckhealth.com. And on social, we've got Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, all that stuff. And our tags for all that is just HeadCheck Health.
All right. And again, I'm Alex Cuesta. I am the host of Sports Opinions Podcast. You can find me on _Cuesta30 on both Twitter and Instagram. And you can find Sports Opinions on Twitter at SportsOpinion30, Instagram, SportsOpinions30. Visit us on Facebook. And the network has officially become the Opinions Podcast Network. So hopefully there's going to be some more social stuff for that. And you'll be able to get all the great shows in one area that are in the network. We are branching out besides just sports. I have my other show that's political. K-Doc has his comics. There's just going to be so many other varieties that you're going to be able to come to the Opinions Podcast Network and get whatever type of podcast that you guys want. And hey, Harrison, if you ever want to do a health check podcast, reach out. Let's do this.
Will do.
All right. So again, I really want to thank everyone for listening. Harrison, thank you so much for coming on. Everybody, have a good one.